Good morning, children. Today we are beginning with a new lesson, the address from our textbook, Snapshots. Children, the address is written by Marga Minko. This short story is a poignant account of a daughter who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war in Holland. When she finds them, the objects evoke memories of her earlier life. However, she decides to leave them all behind and resolves to move on. Marga Minko, who was born in 1920, grew up in a Jewish family of five children in Breda. Unlike her sisters, brothers, and parents, she escaped being arrested and went into hiding during World War II. She made her literary debut in 1957 with Bitter Herbs. The background of the story is War of Holland. The German invasion of Holland began in 1940 and Holland expected to remain neutral as it had done during the First World War. However, the occupation was swift and after fierce fighting, Holland was forced to surrender. The Dutch Jews suffered persecution. Now let's begin the lesson, children. The chapter 2 is given on page number 10 of our textbook Snapshots. Today we are going to do two main headings of the lesson. First, narrator's first visit to 46 Marconi Street, and second, narrator's mother's acquaintance with Mrs. Darling. Do you still know me? I asked. The woman looked at me searchingly. She had opened the door a chink. Chink means only a little, narrow opening. I came closer and stood on the step. I, the narrator. No, I don't know you. I am Mrs. S.'s daughter, the girl replied. She held her hand on the door as though she wanted to prevent it opening any further. Her face gave absolutely no sign of recognition. She kept staring at me in silence. So, for the first time, when narrator visited Mrs. Darling's house, an acquaintance of her mother, Mrs. S., when she went there, Mrs. S. did not recognize as if her. She showed no sign of recognition. Perhaps I was mistaken. I thought perhaps it isn't her. I had seen her only once, fleetingly. Fleetingly means very quickly she must have seen her, and that was years ago. So these two can be the reasons that she was not recognizing the narrator. It was most probable that I had rung the wrong bell. The woman let go of the door and stepped to the side. She was wearing my mother's green knitted cardigan. The wooden buttons were rather pale from washing. She saw that I was looking at the cardigan and half hid herself again behind the door. But I knew now that I was right. So, the narrator has visited an address that was given most probably to her by her mother. Now, she has come after the war, but Mrs. S is no more. It appears the mother is no more, it appears, and Mrs. Darling, to whose house she has come, first showed no sign of recognition. But a little when door opened, the narrator saw that she was wearing her mother's green knitted cardigan that showed that she has come to a right address. Well, you knew my mother, I asked. Now, Mrs. Darling has understood. The lady has understood that the narrator had seen her wearing the cardigan of her mother. Therefore, she could not refuse that she did not know her mother. Have you come back? Said the woman. I thought that no one had come back. Usually it happens, children, during the war. All those who are victims of the war, people feel that they would not come back, they would not return back, they would die in the war. And therefore, she says that I thought that no one had come back, only me. The narrator says it suggests that her mother has not returned back. A door opened and closed in the passage behind her. A musty smell emerged. I regret I cannot do anything for you. Musty smell, children, is the damp smell. Like when the dust collects on the things that are there in our house, especially in the storeroom, a musty smell emerges. This lady was not ready to entertain the narrator, and so she says that I regret I cannot do anything for you. I have come here specially on the train, the narrator said. I wanted to talk to you for a moment. It is not convenient for me now, said the woman. I can't see you another time. She nodded and cautiously closed the door, as though no one inside the house should be disturbed. This shows, children, that the lady was as if hiding something. The lady was not honest, and therefore she did not allow the narrator to get into the house, and she cautiously closed the door. I stood where I was on the step. The curtain in front of the bay window moved. Someone stared at me and would then have asked what I wanted. So here she closed the door, but she went on the side and she wanted to see from the side, as if she wanted to ask the narrator that why she had come to her house. And if anyone from on the side would have looked and asked the woman about the narrator, she would have said, "Oh, nothing." The woman would have said it was nothing. I looked at the number plate. Darling, it said, in black letters on white enamel. Enamel means paint. And on the zam, a bit higher, the number 46. That was the number of the house. As I walked slowly back to the station, I thought about my mother, who had given me the address years ago. It had been in the first half of the war. So, the address was given to the narrator by her mother during the war, the first half of the war. I was home for a few days and it struck me immediately that something or the other about the rooms had changed. I missed various things. My mother was surprised. I should have noticed so quickly. Then she told me about Mrs. Darling. I had never heard of her, but apparently she was an old acquaintance of my mother, whom she hadn't seen for years. She had suddenly turned up and renewed their contact. Since then, she had come regularly. So, the narrator remembers that when was it first time that she came to know about Mrs. Darling? When she was back home during her work during the war, then that time she missed many things from the room, from the house. And then her mother had told her that those things were taken by Mrs. Darling. Mrs. Darling, she had heard for the first time. About Mrs. Darling, she had heard for the first time. But it appeared as if she was an old acquaintance of Mrs. S., narrator's mother. Every time she leaves here, she takes something home with her, said my mother. She took all the table silver in one go. So whenever Mrs. Darling used to come to their house, she used to take back home to her house the things that Mrs. S. and the narrator, her daughter, were having. So she took all the table silver means all the forks and the knives and the spoons that were made out of silver at one time. And then the antique plates that hung there. She had trouble lugging those large vases, and I am worried she got a crick in her back from the crockery. So, crockery, large vases, and all the antique plates, then the silver spoons, forks, knives, everything was taken away by Mrs. Darling. My mother shook her head pityingly. She was very worried because lot of things when Mrs. Darling was taking from their house, she might have got the crick in her back. I would never have dared asked her. She suggested it to me herself. Mrs. S told her daughter, the narrator, that the she could not decide. She could not tell Mrs. Darling to take the things, but Mrs. Darling herself took the things from her. She even insisted she wanted to save all my nice things. So, this reason Mrs. Darling had given to Mrs. S that as they had to leave the place from because they were Jewish people and they were living in a non-Jewish locality. Therefore, they had to leave that place, and if they wanted to live, they had to go somewhere else to live till the war was over. So Mrs. Darling suggested to Mrs. S that till then, till the time when they return back after the war, she is going to keep safe all their things. If we have to leave here, we shall lose everything, she says. So suddenly, if Mrs. S and her daughter have to leave the place, then in that case, all those beautiful antique things or all those good things, they will be spoiled and they will have to lose them. So better Mrs. Darling should keep them along with her safely. Have you agreed with her that she should keep everything? I asked. Now, narrators asked her mother that if they had signed an agreement between them that she will be saving all their nice things, all their valuable things. As if that's necessary, my mother cried. It would be simply be an insult to talk like that. And think about the risk she is running each time she goes out of our door with a full suitcase or a bag. So Mrs. S was thinking that Mrs. Darling, it was not important for Mrs. Darling to sign an agreement with her, and she was running a risk besides carrying the things from Mrs. S house to her own house.